Okay, so in this demonstration, we're going to talk about some brush tool basics. But before we start, let's go ahead and change our workspace. I'm going to change it to painting, and that's going to bring up some panels that are just a little bit more relevant. Now, to use the paintbrush, we can either come over here to our tool panel, or we can use the keystroke B. You'll notice that when I hover the tool over the canvas area, what it's showing me is the last brush used. And so if I want to change that, I can come up here into the tool options, and I can pull down this triangle, and I can select something maybe like this, a normal brush. Now in this panel, I can also change some of the qualities of the brush. So I can change the size of the brush, I can change the hardness of the brush, and I can also change the brush to a different type of preset. You have various brushes here, general brushes, and then as you scroll down further, you've got some specialty brushes. This little cog here, if I click on this little cog, this allows me to save brush presets. If I'm happy with these settings here, I can create my own brush preset. I can group the brushes, rename the current brushes if I need to, delete brushes. I can also import brushes here. Now to the right here, this little folder icon, if I click on that, this brings up the brush settings. I can also access that via the window menu, brush settings. This also allows me to change the qualities of the brush. From here, I can also change the size, hardness. What I like about this panel here is it gives me a visual representation of how it's going to look. I can change the spacing here if I want it to be more of a staccato kind of brush, or if I want it to be more contiguous, blend together, I can bring the spacing all the way down. Here I can also change the hardness of the brush. I can also experiment with different brush presets here. To the left, there's some additional settings. These are more advanced settings for the brush, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. So with brushes, you could also paint using different blend modes. If I wanted to use a subtract blend mode, you can see that changes the color. A luminosity blend mode. I don't use this method very often because it's much more difficult to make changes after the fact. The way I prefer to work when I paint is to paint on a separate layer, and rather than use the blend mode here, I will paint on the layer and use the blend mode within the layer itself. That way I can come back here at any time and change this to whatever I want. So we also have an opacity setting. If I want, I can bring the opacity down, and I can either use this slider here. I can put the number in numerically, or if I hover over the opacity area, I can use the scrubber. There's settings for opacity, for flow. This is the smoothing setting. The smoothing setting is helpful when you're trying to freehand something. Right now I'm using a mouse, so it's a little difficult to do a perfect circle. However, if I raise the smoothing up to 100% and try to do the same thing, it makes it a little bit more precise. If I click on the cog here, I've got different smoothing options. This icon here is relevant if I'm using a tablet. It'll change the opacity based on how much pressure I use. And this icon here will change the size of the brush based on the pressure used. This tool option sets the brush angle. And in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to just create a custom brush here. I'm going to do it with Napoleon Dynamite. I'm going to create a Napoleon Dynamite brush. It's pretty simple to do. If I come up here to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and I'll call this Napoleon Brush, click OK, turn this layer off, and you can see that it's now made this image a brush. Now you'll notice that it's red because when I created the brush, it's using the foreground color for the fill. If I want to rotate the angle of the brush, that's what this is for. If I rotate this out to, let's say, 45 degrees, you can see the effect it has. Okay, so the last option here is symmetry. And this is handy if I want to draw a shape that's symmetrical. Okay, so these are just some of the brush basics. We'll talk about more advanced brush features in later videos.